Hi, and welcome to another episode of Conversations for Connection. I am your host, Dr. Mzi Chachela. Our intention in this show is to bring you topics that you will find useful, that will help you or those you love in your day-to-day life. Today we are having a sad topic, yet very important. We want to dive deeper and look into the experience of grief. Almost all human beings have experienced grief in one way or another. Loss is part of our existence. However, our losses are different, and thus our experiences and reactions will be different. We grieve losses of many things and many things that are important to us. Losses of our loved ones, our health, our jobs, and many more. The intention today is to look and try explore ways to cope with loss. How can we support people who are grieving? How can we cope with loss? Let me introduce to you my friend, Dr. Camagu Potelwa, who is a single father to his son, Nzulu, and by vocation, he is currently a training specialist physician in Cape Town. Hi, Dr. Potelwa.
Good day, Mzee, and thank you for inviting me to the show. I truly feel honored and appreciate it.
And I also want to say thank you for being here. And I wanted us today to look at grief. And there's a reason I chose you to be our guest for this show. Can you tell us more about who you are?
Well, as we have said, I am a single father to my son, Zulu. We reside in Cape Town. I basically from the eastern part of South Africa, the Eastern Cape. I grew up there most of my life. And in just cutting my story short, I got married in 2014. And I was married for 3 years. And that's when my wife was diagnosed with cancer of the pancreas. And that's where the journey of pain, loss for me began. And she eventually passed on in April 2017. So it's almost now about 5 years since her passing. So yeah, that's basically my journey of pain and loss.
And as physicians ourselves or health scientists, and I want us to touch at this before we go into your story. As physicians and as health scientists, we talk about 5 stages of grief. And someone said grief is not a linear and stepwise process, but it is a complex and convoluted process or journey towards acceptance and coping with loss. So I don't know if we can review those before we go to details about your story. Can you review those for us?
We can definitely do that in the literature or in the literature that's outside there. And in terms of understanding of grief, there are about 5 phases, or if you want to call them stages of grief. And the first one would be denial, basically, when you're getting the news of whatever, loss of whatever, pain or diagnosis, then that would be denial, shock, basically. It's a stage where you're trying to cope and then make sense of whatever is happening to you, and just trying to absorb. And then the second stage is anger. You are basically asking yourself, or maybe you're angry at the person that you lost, or you're angry at your boss who fired you, whatever, you're angry at God. Why did this happen to me? Why did it have to be me?
Mm-hmm.
And then thirdly, then is the bargaining stage, where you're now trying to make sense of things, sense of why did this happen to you. You're speaking to people, you're asking people that are close to you, or even strangers, to try and make sense and form a meaning of what happened to you. Then fourthly is the stage of depression. I mean, it's basically that stage you are so bombarded with the feelings of hopelessness. You don't want to speak to anyone. You just want to be with yourself. It seems as if there is a chasm between you and the world, or between you and your family. You prefer that they can talk to each other, but not talk to you. And then the last stage would be actually the acceptance stage. I mean, it's not necessarily the joyful stage of grief, but I mean, it's a sense of where you've come to a place where you actually accepting that this has happened, and you've formed a meaning out of that, even as painful as it is. But you've come to a point where you say, yes, this has happened to my life, and I'm accepting that it's going to be part of my life in the long journey, depending on what type of loss you have experienced.
As we mentioned earlier, that this is, as much as you've listed this in that order, it doesn't necessarily follow that order for all of us, for everyone.
Absolutely. I mean, you can experience those stages in a day or in an hour. You're accepting, and then you go back to denial, or you're depressed in the same vein. I mean, they can be at the same time. So it doesn't necessarily follow that linear pattern that you've mentioned before. It's a convoluted pattern. You might think that, I am at least now at the acceptance stage, and then you start over again, back to square one. And that's the nature of grief, and that's the nature of loss.
So starting with denial, and I have seen many, or a few times, or maybe when I look back into my personal experiences, I'm always terrified by experience of anger. And as you say, sometimes people, if there's loss of health, some people can be angry to their caretakers, to their doctors, and even angry at themselves that they did not take care of themselves early enough, as if maybe they would prevent the illness. Sometimes, there are illnesses that we cannot prevent. And certainly when it comes to death, there are those deaths we always feel like, you know what, this could have been prevented. And when it comes to denial, can you tell me, when was the moment when you realized that? Was it at the diagnosis, the denial, or was it after your wife passed away?
I mean, the way that it happened, let me just tell you the story.
Yes.
The way that it happened is that, my wife had lost her weight a bit, and she started to experience back pain, actually a severe back pain. And we thought that, let's go to see a family physician. So we went to see a family physician, did the examination and did some bedside tests, and found out that she had urinary tract infection, but felt as if there was something that was missing. This type of pain and some weight loss couldn't be caused by urinary tract infection. And then he sent us for an ultrasound in another hospital. So we went to have an ultrasound. Actually, he referred us to a physician in that hospital who was going to review the ultrasound results. So I had the ultrasound, and then we got the results. And the physician phones me and says, I'm so sorry to inform you that we think that your wife has a metastatic cancer that has already spread to the liver. We see masses in her liver. I couldn't believe it. And I thought, for me, I was like, maybe there's another diagnosis. Maybe it's TB. Maybe it's something else. I couldn't make sense of it at all.
Yeah, cancer in a young person.
Cancer in a young person was 29. And I was alone at that time. It was after a call, so I was at home, and my wife was at work. So after receiving this news, I couldn't believe it at all. And I even phoned someone that was important in my life just to see how was I going to tell her. I actually drove around the block, I don't know how many times, just to make sense of this. Yeah, and then I eventually went to tell her. So that was if I put it that way, my place of denial in a way when I received those news. I mean, it was just, the world has just fallen apart. It was just like an avalanche just came through and blew us out of the way.
So the grief started with the loss of health first, when you receive that devastating news that there's cancer not just localized, but already spread to other organs. So the grief process, I could say, was you grieved the loss of health. And did you go through all the stages with the loss of health, or it just extended when she finally passed on?
I think for me, grieving, or even for both of us, it started at that time. And I think, they're not in a particular order. There were times when we were going through the treatment and they'll say that the treatment is not working. And that will put us into a point where we will be, in a point of depression, and we didn't know what to do or what was the next thing from then on. And I think the place that we had not during the illnesses, that we had not come to, was the acceptance part, in a way that we were still saying that, we're going to go through this. We had some hope that we're going to go through this and overcome this. But then when death came, that was in itself a blow to us. Although I know that she was terminally ill, but still, even in that process, it was a big blow. I didn't expect that it was going to take place so soon.
How long did it take from diagnosis to passing away for your wife?
So, from diagnosis, it was about, I would say, 9 months from diagnosis until she passed on.
So it was very quick.
She passed on. It was very, for me, it feels as if it was one of those longest journeys I've ever been through, although it was only about 9 months, but it seemed as if it was almost a lifetime. And having to deal with this thing that was heavy on our shoulder and walk this pain and look at her going through and just looking at her wasting away. It was most devastating. And just seeing it daily going down.
And I always think about the burden that comes with loss of, be it health, be it someone you love, the burden of informing people, because that is not easy on its own.
Yeah. Although, definitely grief and all that changes us and forms us. But it's not an easy journey. And it's a very difficult one. But it's a journey that we must embrace it in its full breadth and depth and length, so that we can become better people in society and even help those who are going through the same. Because if we do not embrace it, and we might go through a trajectory that can even end up leading us into a place where we are maybe diagnosed as having clinical depression. And our pains are different, personally. I think at the end of the day, we must go through those stages if we have to go through them and embrace them.
I have seen cases where someone experiences loss and they experience or they go through grief in their way. But in some cultures, people encourage people to speed up the process and tell you, you know what, just shake it off, or this happens to everyone. You can't be sad for so long, and you find that it's even a month or after. So I feel like in some cultures, or maybe in all cultures, you find people who will try speed this process for people. What's the importance of allowing people to grieve in their way, to take the time they need to grieve their loved ones?
I think as human beings, we have different thresholds in terms of experiencing pain and its loss in whatever culture that we belong to. And I believe that, culture should not be or prescriptive in terms of how someone experiences grief. They should experience grief in a way that makes sense to them. It might take months, it might take years, depending on the type of loss in itself. It might take years. And especially losing someone to death, that is an indelible mark that will forever be with you. And that's one thing that we must actually begin to accept. And whenever I was listening to a person on TED Talk, he's saying that, for her, she said that she cannot move on from the loss of her husband, but because she has moved forward. She still carries her husband with her in the form of the things that had shaped her, and in the form of her offspring, her children. Her husband is still with her in that manner, and she can never move on from her. That mark is indelible and has actually led her to have other experiences and even meet her other partner and have other children because of that grief and that loss that has led her to that point. Mm-hmm. And I believe we should take grief in that way, especially the grief of the loss of someone.
Yeah. And now talking about rushing the process of grief or the experience of grief, sometimes it can come from the person who is grieving, feel like they can defer the process of grief. I read that you cannot really bypass the experience of grief. Hence, you said it's important to allow yourself to experience the pain that comes with losing your loved ones and not try to bypass it. What are the risks that are associated with trying to avoid experiencing the pain of grief?
We as human beings, we are dimensional beings. We're not just biological. We have mind, spirit, and soul. And if we do not go through pain, and things might build up inside of us, and
maybe subconsciously it's still there.
Yeah, subconsciously they're still there, or even sometimes they'll add on maybe to other traumas that we've experienced in the past, and they might culminate now into a break point where someone now gets diagnosed with the clinical depression, or they even go through other diagnoses of mental illness because of these things that they've kept inside of them and they've accumulated. And now they basically, when they're manifesting as the clinical diagnosis, it's saying that I need to get out. I need to be experienced. I cannot be kept inside. So that's the danger of actually not going through. And that's one. And number two, that can be also be destructive in terms of the relationships.
Yes, those destructive behaviors, anger outbursts, substance abuse could be a result of deferred or bypassed grief or pain. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. So, people then will have dysfunctional relationships, or they cannot even keep a relationship because they cannot even, in that relationship, go to that place of sharing their lives. Because, in any relationship, there needs to be some sense or some vulnerability to establish a connection between the individuals. So if that person cannot get to that point by themselves, it's going to be very difficult to get to that point with another person because they have actually not gone through the pain. And that leads to failure of relationships, or leads to dysfunctional of relationships.
And what I've seen in my clinical practice, when people come with the struggles that started after losing their loved ones, when they are angry, going through destructive behaviors, affecting their children, relationship with children, with their spouses or partners, the hardest part is that they feel justified, and it's difficult to move them or to help them cope with that. And I think for me, that's the greatest tragedy when it comes to deferred or someone trying to avoid experiencing that pain of grief or processing that pain of grief. I don't know what you have seen, be it in yourself or be it in your clinical practice or people that you know. Any things that when you looked back, you're like, oh, you know what, that was a bit destructive, or you were able to embrace it. You mentioned that we should embrace the process of grief and experience and process this pain. what have you seen in yourself or in your practice that manifested as, well, what are there any experiences or things that you've seen?
No, I've definitely seen, I've seen that specifically, I mean, especially if someone, maybe they'll stay in denial most of the time because some losses are very traumatic, some losses are very tragic, and the individual won't want to go back to that traumatic experience. They are rather avoid or deny it. And they might be stuck, and they might be actually stuck there at that point. And that then, I mean, that is in itself very, very, very destructive. And I mean, and then it might connect with post-traumatic stress disorder because of that and staying at that place.
So this avoidance of processing the pain, I think what I read and what I've seen as well now that you mentioned it, that all those tragic and unexpected deaths, like if someone maybe was murdered or, someone feel like this just fell on them without them preparing. So it's a different experience. We're not saying it's more important than a death of someone who had chronic illness.
Yeah, so it's not, I mean, it's not, as you said, we're saying that it's not different or more important, but I think it's very deep and very tragic and sudden when someone's life is taken away in that manner of being murdered, especially if that person also was there and experienced that, then it becomes a whole different experience. But I mean, in its essence, it's still a loss. And that needs to be dealt with appropriately in terms of, I think we must mention this here, that I mean, there are certain losses that actually need from the very start, they need external help, they need therapy, they need to go so that they will be able to deal with what they're going through properly with help that is from outside. That is an important point. And not saying that people who have lost people to chronic illness, that they don't need therapy. I think all of us lost someone.
So ideally, everyone should seek grief counseling and have people to walk with. Now, my question to you, is there a stage that was significant for you or that you felt like you were stuck in for longer than you would have expected or longer than other stages in these stages of grief?
I wouldn't really say there was a stage that I was stuck at, but I think there are times that go back to, I'll be experiencing the stages at the same time or in a reverse order in whatever way. But I think, one of the stages for me that I think gets significant where it's at the bargaining stage where you are trying to make sense of things. Even as a Christian myself, trying to see if my theology, does it match what has happened to me? How does my belief in God bring meaning to what I've experienced? And having said that, I think it had shifted totally the way that I believed about healing. It had shifted the way that I believed about grieving. I mean, my experience had shifted that all together. And I think it put me at a place where I was okay with what I was going through. I was okay if I was in my car and if I was crying. I was okay if I was not okay. And I'd made sense with that, where sometimes I was asking myself, I feel lonely. I was okay with those feelings. And I'm actually, at this stage now in my life, I'm actually looking back at this. I am thankful for the journey. I'm thankful that I'd gone through a lowest point. I'm thankful for that. And it has shaped me to the person that I am. And actually, even going into this interview, it took me back. And I was just sitting in my car, and then it just brought certain thoughts, and I was starting to think about it, and brought tears into my eyes, and just brought the depths of what this is, of actually losing someone. It's a thing that you can't just say, oh, okay, I'm moving on now. But it's part of you. It's a chronic thing that will forever be with you. And I think that's the stage that's actually maybe even within acceptance, there are stages where you
Okay.
actually accept, you are actually thankful of what you went through. And actually, in that acceptance, cry and actually feel those moments again. Because I think there are times where
Okay.
you need to feel those moments and you feel them deeper. And it's okay to feel them.
That sounds really healthy, if I can put it that way. And it reminds me, and I want you to help us, help someone who's listening to this show. I read about the concept of complicated grief. And I think you've already mentioned a few things that could complicate grief if we are not dealing with it in a way that is progressive and processing the pain. Are you able to just summarize for us or just put together what complicated grief is compared to, let's say, regular grief or normal grief?
I think, I would say that when you are, as specifically when you're at the stage of, especially on the stage of depression, sometimes at that stage you might not want to be talking to anyone. The world might seem as if it's far apart from you. When in that stage you spiral down into a prolonged stage of not of hopelessness and being helpless, then that can spiral down into forming complicated grief, which can be a precursor to clinical depression. And I think that seeking therapy or grief counseling could be a remedy to that, or even at that stage, when it's prolonged or you can't seem to be breaking through. You seem to have difficulty getting up in the morning. You can't enjoy the things that you used to enjoy. And, you just don't have any interest in people, don't have any interest in any relationships. And that should be a red flag. It's saying then that I should actually seek help about this. And this now become a worry, or even they border into becoming having suicidal ideation or suicide thought. And or actually even having symptoms of seeking attention, maybe even taking an overdose of sleeping tablets or anything of that nature, then that should be actually a red flag to say that actually I must speak to somebody, I must see somebody.
So what I've gathered from our conversation is grief has these stages that we go through. We mentioned denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And grief needs to be embraced, or you need to go through the process of grieving and try not to defer it. And if you defer it, two things can happen. Well, maybe you can have grief that's progressive and the person goes all the way, and eventually, even though it's back and forth, you end up accepting in a healthy way. As you said, that now you still have the moments where you cry, but you cry from a point you've accepted. You remember your wife in a way that you still miss her, but you are not hopeless. But what I've gathered from this is maybe grief can, even if someone tries to deal with it, can progress to complicated grief, or the risk of developing complicated grief comes with failing to process the pain or trying to avoid the pain. Then people start having destructive behaviors, develop PTSD, depression, and many other ways. So complicated grief can come from trying to defer or trying to avoid the grieving process, so it's protracted, or even someone who's trying, if they are high risk of just getting worse, it can develop those ways. Did I get this correctly?
That's perfect. That's the way that complicated grief can develop.
Now I have a question for you. What would you have loved from your support system during your grieving process?
I think the one thing that I desired for people, and I received in many instances, it's just people coming and just being there and They don't have to say that it's going to be okay, it's going to be all right,
Yeah,
and so on and so forth.
that is
But
so key.
just being there.
Yeah, I read about that,
Yeah.
that being there, not trying to fix the problem and not trying to explain it.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
You know. I think I was listening to someone, and actually this person is a minister, actually is a broadcaster in a well-known radio station here in South Africa. And he was just saying that when he lost his wife, you don't remember all the things that people say, or even the words that people say, and or to try and make you feel better, because in some way at that point it won't remedy the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, having people with you saying that, I mean, even if they say that we are with you, that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
We are with you. Those
Yes.
people will come and not say anything, just leave food at the door.
So the importance of being present more than talking, be present. So the support system must be present and do less talking. What grieving people need is the presence. Be present, be there, support them in many ways, and keep the words for now.
And also, they must just create, I mean, maybe I'm asking too much of people, is that they must create a place where it is you who is talking.
Okay.
So that you are going by that, because debriefing and talking can help you to go through the process of grief in a healthy way. And also understanding that, there are times that you actually just need to be by yourself at times.
Mm-hmm. And people should respect that you are not withdrawing, but you are taking time to process this pain.
But I mean, I understand that that's very difficult. I mean, human beings are not telepathic. They won't see what's inside, what I'm thinking in my head. But I think, if they are close, there are people that are close, I think they will understand the type of person that you are and give you the space that you need, and actually be present when they need to. Where they need to be. It's like, actually, for me, I had a friend of mine just after maybe a few months when my wife passed. He decided that he was going to come all the way from another city and just come with me. And I think, being with him at that time helped me to just go through the bargaining process of trying to make sense of things at that time. Because I think, going through that process, I needed someone to just speak to and talk to. And yeah.
Oh, wow.
I think the other thing is that you also need to have people, because grief is not only about lamenting, right? I think it's not only about lamenting. I think that sometimes we make, especially in terms of losing someone that is significant in your life, it's not only about lamenting, but also you need an outlet of people who listen to you when you are reliving the memories, or we are telling the memories that we used to do this, we used to go this, and just telling good times. Yeah.
Wow. Would you say, now that you've gone through grieving your wife at such an early stage or early age of your life and early stage of your marriage, would you say that has made you a better support system when it comes, or better support system when it comes to you supporting now your loved ones and friends who are going through the process of grief?
Yeah, definitely. It has. It has, because when you are at the front line of losing someone, it changes you, changes your whole world. You're no longer imagining what others go through, but in a sense, what they are going through. To now realize that just being there with them and them seeing you, that you're there with them, is enough. And actually not even saying many things to them, and saying that I usually go and say when a friend or a family member has passed on, and sometimes people look at me funny. I'm like, no, you must go through this. You must get all you can get from this process. You must go through that pain as much as you can, and cry if you have to, a lot if you have to. I mean, and that's okay to cry, and that's okay to feel the pain.
Have an outlet.
And I usually say that, have an outlet. I usually say that, don't waste your pain. Don't waste your loss. Let it do its work inside of you so that you can become the person that this can actually make you to be.
I love that. Do not waste your pain. Make use of your pain so that it helps you to be a better person or to understand things better. Dr. Potelwa, thank you so much. We can talk about this even longer. I appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your story. And I know for sure someone out there who is listening learned something new. And I think all of us who gonna listen to this are certainly gonna be better when it comes to dealing with our own grief or supporting our loved ones when they are grieving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate it, having been part of this.
And I hope that we will have a follow-up conversation live on our page on Conversations for Connection so that we can engage with people, but we will see. Thank you very much.
Good. I'll be glad to do that and to engage people personally in a virtual platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you.